A lot of viewers outside Canada are asking the same questions. They're seeing the headlines about how Mark Carney and the Liberals are going to maybe get a majority, and they're wondering how that can happen without a giant national election campaign. In the United States, if the leader changes, well, you're looking at a massive presidential race that can last 2 years and cost billions of dollars. So people look at Canada and think, something strange just happened.
But the reality is actually very simple. And it's a good example of how parliamentary democracies work. In Canada, we don't elect a prime minister directly the way that Americans elect a president. Canadians elect members of parliament in their local ridings, and whichever party can command the confidence of the House of Commons forms the government. The leader of that party becomes the prime minister.
And that's the part that often confuses Americans. In their system, the president is a single national figure elected separately from Congress. In Canada and many other democracies, the executive leadership comes out of the legislature itself. That means the prime minister is not sitting above the parliament. They are part of parliament and accountable to it every single day.
Which leads to the key concept that defines a parliamentary democracy: confidence. A government stays in power only as long as it maintains the confidence of the elected legislature. If the prime minister loses that confidence, Parliament can trigger a new election or replace the government anytime. That means the system has built-in flexibility that presidential systems just simply don't have.
And when you step back and actually look at the global picture, parliamentary systems are actually very common. Canada has one. The United Kingdom has one, Australia, New Zealand, Germany, Sweden, Norway, Japan, India. The list is very long. Many of the world's most stable democracies operate this way because it spreads power across institutions rather than concentrating it in a single office.
And that's really the heart of the difference between the two models. In a parliamentary system, power is shared. The prime minister leads the government, but that leadership depends on the support of the elected representatives. Those representatives can question the government, they can challenge it, and if necessary, remove it. It's a constant relationship between the executive and the legislature.
Now, in the United States, those two branches are separated almost completely. The president sits in the executive branch. Congress sits in the legislative branch. They are elected on separate tracks and often represent completely different political realities. That separation was originally designed as a safeguard against concentrated power.
The idea was that no single leader could dominate the entire government because the branches would check each other. But in practice, what often happens is something closer to paralysis. If the president and Congress belong to different parties, the government can grind to a halt. Major legislation stalls. Budgets turn into political standoffs, and the system spends months locked in conflict.
Now, Canada's system handles that differently because the executive comes from the legislature. If a government cannot pass legislation or loses the ability to govern, the system resolves that quickly. Either the government adjusts, another party forms government, or voters go back to the polls. The process can move much faster because the political machinery, it's integrated.
And that flexibility becomes especially important during moments of political change. Leadership transitions can happen without shutting down the entire system. When a governing party chooses a new leader, the government continues operating as usual because the authority flows through Parliament, not the leader. The country doesn't need to freeze for a year while candidates go on rallies across 50 states.
And that difference, it may sound technical, but it has huge implications for how democracies function. Parliamentary systems tend to be more adaptable because leadership can change without constitutional drama. If a prime minister loses support inside their party or inside parliament, well, the system can correct itself super quickly.
Now let's talk about something else that often comes up in these conversations: majority governments. When Canadians hear that a prime minister has a majority, it doesn't mean that one person suddenly gained unlimited authority. It means the governing party has won more than half the seats in the House of Commons. That majority allows the government to pass legislation more easily, but it still operates inside Parliament.
And that's another key difference with the presidential system, right? In the United States, A president can be elected while receiving fewer votes nationally than their opponent because of that stupid electoral college. Americans have seen that happen more than once, and it's so frustrating. So basically what happens is the person with the most power in the executive branch does not necessarily represent the majority of the voters.
Canada doesn't have that kind of mechanism at the national level. We use a system called first past the post for individual ridings, which it does have its own debates and criticisms. But the Prime Minister still emerges from elected members of Parliament. The government exists because it commands the support of those representatives.
And once that government is in place, it remains accountable to Parliament every single week. Prime ministers appear in what's called question period. Ministers answer for their departments, opposition parties scrutinize decisions in committees and debates. It's a constant cycle of accountability that happens inside the legislature itself.
In the American system, accountability tends to happen through investigations, hearings, and elections that are spaced years apart. A president elected for a 4-year term stays in office even if public opinion shifts dramatically. Removing that president requires an impeachment process that is politically and legally complex. In practice, it rarely happens.
So this brings us to something that has become increasingly controversial in the United States: how elections themselves are structured. Over the past few decades, American politics has been deeply shaped by the redrawing of electoral districts. State legislatures control the boundaries of congressional districts, and those boundaries can be designed to favor one party over another.
The practice is known as gerrymandering. I'm sure you've heard this a lot lately. Political parties use detailed data to draw district lines that cluster opposing voters into small numbers of seats while spreading their own supporters across many districts. The result can be a map where the number of seats won by each party does not match the overall vote at all.
Now, Canada, we've taken a different approach. Electoral boundaries here are drawn by independent commissions rather than politicians. Those commissions use population data and geographic considerations to create ridings that are intended to be fair and balanced. Political parties do not sit in a room designing maps that guarantee their own victories.
Voting itself also looks very different between the two countries. In Canada, the process is straightforward. Elections Canada runs the federal vote, and polling stations are widely accessible. Advanced voting, mail-in ballots, and identification requirements are designed to make participation very simple.
In the United States, the rules vary dramatically from state to state because elections are administered at the state level. Some states have extensive early voting periods and easy mail-in systems. Others impose stricter identification requirements, reduce the number of polling stations, or even limit voting hours. The experience of voting can change dramatically depending just on where someone lives.
And that difference affects turnouts. Canada typically sees voter participation around 60 to 70% in federal elections. The United States often sees lower participation in presidential elections and even lower turnout in midterm elections. They have structural barriers, complicated registration rules, and logistic challenges, and they can discourage participation.
And another factor that shapes the American system is the enormous influence of money. Presidential campaigns cost billions of dollars. Candidates spend years fundraising, buying advertising, and building national organizations before voters even cast a ballot. The scale of that process can turn elections into extended political marathons and includes a lot of money.
Canada has limits on campaign spending, and we have shorter official election periods. Parties still campaign vigorously, but the scale of spending is far smaller. The system focuses more on national debates and policy platforms rather than multi-year fundraising operations.
Now, all of these differences add up to two very different democratic cultures. Parliamentary systems tend to emphasize collective leadership inside the legislature. Presidential systems place enormous attention on a single national figure who occupies the executive branch.
That concentration of attention can create intense political polarization. When a single leader becomes the central focus of national politics, every election can start to feel like an existential battle. Supporters and opponents frame the contest as a fight over the entire direction of the country.
In parliamentary politics, it still involves, sure, sharp debate, but the structure spreads authority across parties and institutions. Governments can change leadership without dismantling the entire political system. Coalitions can form, policies can shift, and the machinery of government keeps on moving.
And MPs can cross the floor. Governments can start out with a majority, but if MPs decide that they are not happy with the government in power, they can cross to the other side, and vice versa. And that's what we are seeing happen right now. Mark Carney has very strong polling right now, and MPs are seeing the work that he is doing. Pierre Poilievre, he's very toxic and divisive, so people are leaving his party and crossing the aisle to join the Liberals. 4 people have crossed so far, leaving the Liberals just 2 MPs shy of having a majority government, meaning they will cross that threshold if they get 2 more people in their party.
So that brings us to the 3 by-elections that are upcoming in April. These are produced by either people vacating the positions or it being overruled by the courts. So now you have 3 by-elections happening, and the Liberals only need to win 2 of those in order to form a majority.
So that's the way that a parliamentary system remains fluid. All of this can be happening while the government is still working and functioning properly. It's really a strong system, and I think that's why it works so much better.
So when people ask how Canada can shift to a majority government without a national election, well, the answer is that our system was designed that way from the beginning. Leadership flows through Parliament, and Parliament represents voters across the country.
And when you compare that structure to the American model, you can see why many democracies have chosen parliamentary systems. They allow governments to adapt quickly, distribute authority across institutions, and maintain accountability inside the legislature.
The American system was created in the 18th century by founders who were deeply concerned about centralized power. They built layers of separation to prevent any single leader from dominating the government. But 2 centuries later, that system is showing some serious cracks.
And that's why parliamentary democracies continue to function effectively across so many countries. They distribute authority, adapt to political change, and keep the executive tied directly to elected representatives.
So we want to hear from you. Did you understand what the difference is between a parliamentary system and a presidential system? And which one do you think works better for the people?
And if you want to support our channel, check out the pinned comment below because we have links to all of the fun stuff like our merch store, the A-Team, and our Substack.
And as always, remember to like, share, hit that bell so you don't miss one of our videos. Thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Ciao for now.